Hello and welcome back to the Game Room. You know what I love? Video games. You know what I love talking about? Games. And it seems like a lot of people these days who cover games seem to hate them. Or at least the people who play them. Well, that's not me, and that's not the 1,823 of you beautiful people checking out this video here today. Now, for today's video, this has been something that I always love debating, I always love talking with people, and that is revisionist history in gaming. Because sometimes, as someone who's been playing games since the early 90s, there will be a popular thought process about certain things that I just gotta call BS on. So if that sounds interesting to you, let's check it out. There's a lot of games out there, some of which you've never even heard of. That's where I come in. My name's Luke. I've been playing games since the age of 2, and I have no life.
This is my game room.
Alright, before we get started, let me just preface that these are my opinions. Now, I myself could be guilty of my own revisionist history or of my own lack of knowledge of certain things growing up, but because this is my video, this is the way I see it. And we're going to start off with what I think is one of the biggest culprits of revisionist history across any sort of gaming, and that is the fact that Zelda II is a bad game, black sheep of the family, not good, not a great game, was not loved when it came out. So Zelda 2 was actually my favorite Zelda of the original two. I never really got into the original Zelda all that much. Zelda 2 was faster, you got to play as a more adult looking Link, it had cooler secrets in my opinion, you had spells you could use, and even though at the time I really didn't know much about RPG mechanics, it did have a very satisfying leveling up system, power creep system, the items were impactful, it had an open world where you could find secrets, much in the vein of the old Zelda, but I just found the combat much more engaging and really enjoyed it. And until Link to the Past came out, I never really thought there was anything lacking in this new direction Zelda went. It seemed like a natural progression. Back in the day, sequels, even though, like, sequels naturally were different than the original, that was the reason why you bought it. You'll find a lot of times, especially in the NES era, if you had a sequel that was too close to the original, most people didn't buy it. That's why stuff like DuckTales 2, Chip and Dale 2, RC Pro-Am 2, a lot of them just ended up being obscure. No one really picked it up, but Mario 2, Castlevania 2, Zelda 2, although Mega Man 2 kind of eschews that, but Mega Man 2 is way different as far as the amount of robot masters you have, and other than that, it's not really that much different, but that's not a great example, but still, you can see what happened. And what's funny is that around 2010, I mean, obviously, AVGN has a huge influence, and I think that's when it really started creeping up, but especially as people went back and played the original, or played the second one, and then they hear how a lot of the original is, and the second one's completely different. Every other game in the series is completely different, and Zelda 2 just gets crapped on endlessly for being too hard, too obtuse, isn't great, when in reality, this is a phenomenal game, and not just a phenomenal game, a phenomenal Zelda game, and really sets up a lot of great tropes that are used throughout the series. I love Zelda 2, so I might be biased, and I always say it, people who think you're supposed to go to Death Mountain after the first palace, you're going to find a world of hurt. You got to go to the swamp, you got to level up your swordplay, even go to the second palace, do that first, go to Death Mountain, you're going to rock it. So that is my first piece of revisionist history, is that Zelda 2 was not a good game. No, Zelda 2 was a great game when it came out, and over the years, it's slowly been getting tarnished, and I hate that, and one of my biggest hopes with this channel and my legacy in all of these videos is to kind of wipe that away, because Zelda 2 is a great game, and I talked about it a couple of times now. Infernax plays a lot like a modern Zelda 2, and if that, you should check that out because it's a fantastic game, and it definitely will scratch that Zelda 2 itch. Alright, and then the other one that I always think of all the time when people talk about revisionist history, or talk about things, is that the N64 controller was awkward. So the three-pronged, people didn't like this. Could not have been further from the truth. You gotta remember, back when this came out in '96, no controllers had analog sticks on them. No controllers had the ability to put a memory card into it. As well as you didn't have a system that had 4 controller ports built into it. And the thing that was so revolutionary about the N64 when it came out was that there really wasn't a set playstyle for controllers. Because the NES had 2 buttons, Super NES had 4 buttons, Genesis had 3 buttons. The PlayStation came out, it had 4 buttons, and it added a second shoulder button. So that was really the big innovation there. So then when the N64 comes out, not only are you adding an analog stick, but you have a D-pad as well. You're adding a Z trigger on the back, so a back button that you can use with your finger, and then these C buttons. And what was nice is that you could hold the controller like this. You could hold the controller like this. Not many games did this, but you could in theory. And some games would control where you would walk with the C buttons and aim with this button. You would have some that would do this. You have some that would do this, and then it would allow you to use this for brief moments. And it was never awkward. It was not bad, and people really enjoyed it, and I still really enjoy it. And I know a lot of people will hate on the N64 because you can break the thumbsticks, but that's on the player. If you treat your controller gently, it will treat you well. A lot of people have very greasy, sweaty mitts, going nuts, throwing controllers, getting raged, and that's what's going to break it. But I've never had an N64 controller go out on me over the years, and I've always loved using it. And when it came out, it was loved. Now you have the N64, the analog N64, whatever it's called. They're not even making an 8-bit do version of this because everyone, wants that offset Brawler 64 modern console type control stick scheme. But when this was so revolutionary when it came out, and everyone loved it. In fact, PlayStation immediately copied it with the DualShock. They had never done analog sticks before that, and every single console after the N64 added analog sticks. So not only was this a great controller, but it influenced the entire industry. And when people talk about how awkward the Trident is, I don't believe you. I don't believe you actually used it because the N64 has a ton of nostalgia around it, and the controller is one of those big things that I think plays into that. I mean, think when you're playing games that require you to use the Z trigger to fire, it's still one of the most satisfying things ever. Even though the nunchuck on the Wii doesn't replicate that, how great it felt doing a trigger pull in GoldenEye, for instance. And speaking of GoldenEye, one of the things that's come up recently at least with the re-release of it for the Switch Online and the Xbox Online, kind of dispelled a little of those myths, but there'd been this narrative creeping in that the GoldenEye original N64 one was not all that important. It didn't age well, wasn't that important, when in reality, most people, their first interaction with a first-person shooter, a real first-person competitive shooter, was in the GoldenEye multiplayer. Now, the first-player single campaign mode was fantastic. Of all the different games that you could do campaigns-wise, it's still one of the best, in my opinion, ever. But the multiplayer really unlocked the door for a lot of people. It set up so many tropes that then Halo would take to the next level and would be used for years to come until things like loadout settings came out in Call of Duty and things like that. But GoldenEye was so important in introducing console players, which, in my opinion, console players were the majority of gamers back then. This comes to another thing I want to talk about, is that PC gaming and console gaming were largely separated, at least with people my age. Now, that may not have been quote-unquote true for everyone, people that are 10 years older than me or things of that nature, but if you did not have a real PC in your house, PC gaming was not a thing. You needed someone who had the ability to play it. The only PC gaming you played was something on an Apple II like Oregon Trail or Math Blasters or something like that. Not everyone played Doom. That's another one. Doom is important, yes, but I would say GoldenEye is more important than Doom because more people were exposed to the first-person genre through GoldenEye than Doom. Even though, I would say people who made GoldenEye likely were influenced by it, but that's not always who gets the credit. If you look at film, oh sure, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari influenced this, or all the serials influenced George Lucas. No, people talk about Star Wars and Indiana Jones. They don't talk about like Dirk Danger or whatever those serialized guys from the 40s are. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is GoldenEye. I'm glad it's getting its respect again with that re-release because GoldenEye is very, very, very important. Now, a lot of these are around the N64, I'm realizing. Another one about the N64 was that there was a little game that's actually getting a remake, probably, it's coming out in a few days from now, Mario RPG. Mario RPG was legendary. Everyone loved it. When Squaresoft stopped its relationship with Nintendo, people wept, including myself, because I really enjoyed Mario RPG. Well, lo and behold, they were going to bring back that style of game under Paper Mario. However, this game, as beloved as it is now, when it came out, it was a disappointment. Because we were really expecting Mario RPG 2. It was touting itself as the continuation of Mario RPG, when it's not. It is not. This is much more of a Nintendo take on it. Now, it's made by Intelligent Systems, which are the people who made Fire Emblem. So, I didn't know that at the time, also because we didn't have a Fire Emblem in the States at the time. But it was a very fun game, and now I feel like everyone talks about how phenomenal it was. Same thing with Thousand Year Door. Thousand Year Door kind of came out and went, as far as I was concerned. I had no interest in it because Paper Mario was... It was a fun game, but it was not what I was expecting. I didn't have that big party base. If I remember, it's just Mario and then a secondary character, which for the most part, I think they can... That was the same way in Thousand Year Door as well, and kind of the dumbing down of the RPG formula. And I just never, I just... It wasn't as huge of a fan of it. And looking back now, everyone says how great this game is, and I just want to throw it out there that when Paper Mario came out, it was a fun game, but it was not what we expected, so it definitely was tarnished a little bit because of that. Now, here's one that leads into that too. So I might even make a separate video about this, but the biggest revisionist history thing that I can think of is the term JRPG. So if you've noticed, I don't use that term anymore. I really hate it. It's not just because of that article that came out this year where people were saying it was a negative term or bad against Japanese developers or something of that nature. That's not necessarily why I don't like it. I don't like it because growing up, the term didn't exist. No one called it a JRPG. Final Fantasy VII came out, Final Fantasy VIII came out, Chrono Trigger, all these things, they were just called RPGs. So there was an RPG, and then intrinsically you knew that meant, oh, that's a turn-based game. And then you had an action RPG, and then you're like, okay, so it's an action-based RPG that uses those leveling mechanics, gearing, all that, and makes it a little bit more active based. And then there was a tactical RPG or a strategy RPG, and those were things that were similar to turn-based, but you use a squad and it's on a grid. So Final Fantasy Tactics, Ogre Battle, Fire Emblem, things like that. And that was the only term I'd ever heard. So there was RPG, turn-based, tactical RPG, and action RPG. You heard through the grapevine that there was computer games or like Dungeons and Dragons type games on computers, but those were for the super nerds. And that's what I'm talking about, is that PC gaming and console gaming really were two separate entities. It's like comparing television and film as far as the interactivity of it at the time, which I'd still say is still somewhat the case. I mean, Steam kind of threw that anyways. So around the time that World of Warcraft came out, I heard a term called MMORPG, and that meant massive multiplayer online role-playing game. And that's when I mentioned in another video, I didn't know RPG stood for role-playing game. And that's where you get these things where people are like, oh, well, Zelda's a role-playing game, or Mario's, yeah, you're playing the role as someone. Sure, I get it. I get where the terminology came from, but at a certain point it morphed into meaning turn-based. Well, when I was in college, being stuck in WoW, right around, I'll blame this probably on G4 and things of that nature. G4 TV came up, and then they started using the term RPG more in line for what the computer RPGs were, and the Western RPG. And then the way to distinguish it was to focus on the Japanese developers and call them JRPG. And this also went in line with what was a problem, in my opinion, that was happening with a lot of the Japanese developed RPGs, is that because the graphics were getting better and because a lot of these things were based on Japanese animes and mangas, a lot of their titular heroes tended to be preteens, teenagers, younger looking people. And so as the player base was growing up, you started to get a disconnect, because at a certain point, when I was playing the pixel art as Chrono, or playing the pixel art as Squall or Cloud, It was one thing to see the blocky character, but then you have the cool renders where they look human. And that's one of the reasons why I love Final Fantasy VIII, is because the characters looked realistic. But then you get stuff like Final Fantasy X, and you have Titus, or you get Final Fantasy 12, and you have the characters in that just look like they're 17. Final Fantasy 13, or all the, like, eventually they all started looking like, even the guys started looking like 17-year-old girls. And it just didn't seem as, not as much cool, but it's not as much pull to it, where it's like, oh, you know what? I'm more drawn to the badass armor dude in Oblivion, or the badass guy in Gears of War, and things of that nature. And really, when I first started hearing, like when Oblivion came out on the Xbox 360, that's when I first started hearing RPG be referred to something that was not a turn-based game, or even really a traditional action RPG. And then Dark Souls started getting that terminology, and all these other things started getting terms, and then the term JRPG started being slapped retroactively backwards onto the other games that I used to love and play, like Final Fantasy Tactics. Oh, and it makes sense, Japanese role-playing game, but we don't call them Western role-playing game. And then things like Baldur's Gate and Fallout and all those started taking the terminology, and where it really became a problem is going back to that article earlier, where the Japanese developers, in order to entice more people in the West, would start adopting the style of game that was being made in the West, because the term JRPG was becoming a deterrent. And not just because of stuff like the art style, which I will admit, I do get bothered by the art style sometimes. I'm not a huge Akira Toriyama fan, or Akira Toriyama fan all the time. Why are the guys' eyes so close together? But I love the style of the gameplay. It's one of the reasons why Final Fantasy VII Remake really disappointed me, is because it just felt like every other Bayonetta Platinum style game with a little bit of extra layer on it. I gave up on games like Dragon Age Inquisition. Even Divinity Original Sin I got tired of because of it. Give me an Octopath. Give me a Trials of Mana. Give me something that I can really think about, because I enjoy taking time to plan out my strategy. It's why I love Fire Emblems, and why I liked Fire Emblem Engage a lot more than Three Houses or Fates, and no, Awakening was good, but still, it really brought it back to the strategy of it. Of like, okay, here is your tool bag, and here is your lumber. Go ahead and make the house, and deal with all these things that are happening. Instead of all happening in real time, it really gives you a chance to adapt and adjust. And anyways, I love turn-based. But yes, that is why I don't like the JRPG term, is because now, because of that retroactive labeling, it led to a lot of the games I loved not being made. In fact, some people thinking they don't make money and can't be made anymore, which I categorically deny. Anyways, yeah, I should probably make a whole video talking about that, but I'll stop right there. So yes, I don't like the retroactive terminology of JRPG, and I don't use it anymore. And if you're a fan of those style of games, I would encourage you not to use it too, because according to Japanese developers, it is a deterrent from them making the games that way. All right, and now I mentioned it a little bit just then. So a Final Fantasy game that came out, which now, for a while, it was beloved. And then it was said, this game is terrible. Now, in recent years, I would say it's kind of getting a devil's advocate. Okay, you either love it or hate it. And I just want to talk about it a little bit. That's Final Fantasy VIII. So I am definitely of the camp that loved it. When the game came out, I loved it. I was obsessed with Seifer. I mean, I still kind of do my hair like him. Or Cypher, however I say Seifer, that's what I'm going to say. I dressed up as him in the 7th grade, and the girl I had a crush on asked who he was, or was he 8th grade, and I said, oh, I don't know, because I was embarrassed to tell her I dressed up as a character from a video game, but I looked super cool. I even got a lab coat, got the white, like, I've been looking for a white leather trench coat my whole life, just to look as badass as Seifer looks in this game. But it was phenomenal. The characters in the actual battle sequences looked like the characters that were moving throughout the world, which was different than Final Fantasy VII and was one of the biggest additions. And because I hadn't played older RPGs with group systems where you could see the 3 players walking behind you, which almost happens in every single one of them, so it's not even that big a deal. But for me, it was. But over the years, I've heard people saying this game isn't great, the draw system isn't great. I never really saw it, and when the game came out, no one really saw it either. And it's one of those things where I'm not quite sure why it got that, because it also, Final Fantasy 9 I couldn't stand. I still don't like, and I hear all the time how much people love that game. And I wouldn't say that's revisionist history, because when 9 came out, it was liked a lot. More would be something like 10, where if I remember 10 coming out and people were like, this game is terrible. And then over the years, I think people have started to say it's pretty good. Anyways, Final Fantasy VIII, great game. Now here's a fun one. So I don't have an example for it, but the game Fortnite, it was not always good. In fact, it wasn't even a battle royale game when it came out. So this is one of the more modern examples. I don't know if a lot of you guys remember when Fortnite was announced, it was essentially a tower defense survival game where you would build up your fort and defend it from the zombies that would periodically come out. And I think it was when PUBG came out, because the game had been in early access, when PUBG came out with this battle royale formula with this ever-shrinking circle, then Fortnite came out with a battle royale mode, and then that's when it became the game that just took over the zeitgeist there for a few years. And so I just think it's funny, no one really talks about it. And I remember when my buddy Rewind Mike was playing it for the demo, they had like an early access demo before they added the battle royale mode, and he was saying it was decent. And it's just funny that was the game I read about. That was the game I was expecting. And then when it just became this huge overnight sensation, it was like, what happened? How the hell what a great swerve. So that worked out pretty well for them. Okay. Another one that's kind of funny, because it still happens to this day, is that sports games were fun. In the 90s, in the 80s, maybe not so much the 80s, but definitely in the 90s. So a lot of times now, especially this is kind of a collector's one, there's a reason why there's so many out there and they're so cheap, because they sold a ton. And they sold a ton because they were fun to play. We didn't have as many pick up and play experiences where you could play a match and then put it down. You usually had single player experiences, arcade style games, or these fun competitive games, because you can have tons of competitive shooters, competitive multiplayer, things of that nature. So that's where sport games plugged in. But also, it was just fun to play video football, video soccer, video basketball. Sometimes you didn't have all your friends on the street and you could do it. And a lot of these games are still fun to play today. And I think a lot of, and I'm guilty of this because of the collecting mindset, because they don't really, what's the difference between NHL 92, 93, 94, 95, 96? Not much other than the rosters and maybe some new teams or expansion teams. But the games are actually enjoyable, and so enjoyable that they're still making a lot of these games to this day. You still got a new FIFA. You still got a new Madden, not Madden. So it's just funny to think about that. We talk about how terrible sports games are, and yet if you pop it in, you're gonna have a decent time. Much more so than some of the older. And that was the other thing, is that if you bought a sports game, unless it's 10-yard fight, normally it was gonna be a fun time. That's usually why I would always buy an iteration of Madden or an iteration of FIFA, because it always was competent, which wasn't always the case before you had a magazine or something of that nature to tell you if it was good. Or even then, sometimes you wouldn't agree with the reviewer. But generally, if you picked up a sports game, like a mainline sports game, not something like a BMX biking or something of that, like Heavy Shredding, which is a game that I want to like, but is terrible, usually you would be safe and have a decent enough time. All right, now here's one that is just kind of a pet peeve of mine. So I don't know about you guys, but the Contra Code, up, down, left, right, select, A, B, start. And I always say select because I'm so used to playing Contra with 2 players, but it's the same thing, just A, B, start without the select. But the select, that's just, I think that's where you have to put it in order to do 2-player for the 30-man code. But it's called the Konami code now because it was in Gradius first. But I don't know about you guys, but growing up, it was just called the Contra Code. I don't remember anyone ever saying that code was usable in anything else other than Contra. And it's only in the first Contra. If I remember, Super C has a different code, little bit different, not nearly as famous, but that's just one that it's kind of a pet peeve. I still call it the Contra Code. When I had Jen play Contra a few years back for Noob Gamer, I called it the Contra Code because that is what I call it, and that's what you guys should call it too. All right, we're getting down to the end here. I do have a list here because a lot of these are theories and not necessarily one that I can show an example for. But one that I can show an example for is Resident Evil 1's terrible voice acting. As funny as it sounds, I don't remember the voice acting ever being said it was terrible. Now, feel me out on this. Back in 96, when the game came out, voice acting in games was very novel. And at this point, most of the times where you saw real life people on screen was in a compressed image in a Sega CD game. Getting Resident Evil, where you actually had realistic looking cutscenes, and then you could have the dialogue in the game without having it be disconnecting. I think we were so impressed with the fact that the game was talking to us that we never registered how bad the dialogue was. Also because it suited the tone. Like, it's like a B horror movie at times, and it was genuinely scary at times. That those moments of levity of hearing Chris talking to Rebecca and be like, yes, I'm Chris Redfield, or Jill Sandwich, or all those, it wasn't as jarring. I don't know if I'm alone in this. At the time when I played, it was like 10, 12. I never found it all that bad. I don't remember everyone saying it was that bad. This really is only something that started to come up around the same time when people started talking about Symphony of the Night's voice acting at the beginning being so bad. So I don't know. That's why it just seems like, I guess you could say PS1 era voice acting being terrible as a revisionist history altogether, because at the time, it's like we were just glad it was playing. I couldn't believe that you were hearing voices at all. We were so used to hearing the like, the really garbled mechanical electronic sounding stuff. So the terrible voice acting was welcome, and I still love it. I still love it to this day. All right, last couple here. So another N64 game, this one was a Zelda title that I was not a huge fan of. It's Majora's Mask, and I just don't know why so many people love it. And it's kind of funny. This game to me has the opposite effect of Zelda II. So where Zelda II came out and it was beloved, and then over the years it's slowly been getting crapped on, Majora's Mask when it came out was fun, but it was not great. It was like, wow, that was alright, but man, let's go play Ocarina of Time again. That game's amazing. Now, slowly over the years, it's gotten to is Ocarina of Time actually even as good as Majora's Mask? Majora's Mask is deep, and so like there's so much interpretation going on of this game that makes me want to scream sometimes, because it's a game based around a timer. You're resetting all the time. Nothing you ever do is permanent. And I'm still of the volition that I don't like it that much. I feel like most people who like it got into it after Twilight Princess was out, and Skyward Sword, and Minish Cap, and Phantom Hourglass, and Wind Waker. And so going back and playing this game was a breath of fresh air compared to those. And it's also playable, unlike Zelda 2, as far as needing a certain level of skill. Because I think if Zelda 2 wasn't so hard at times, it probably would be a lot more appreciated as well. But that's just speculation. But yeah, Majora's Mask is not very good, in my opinion. I still don't like it, and that's what I'm going to say about that. All right. We're going to do a few quick ones here. So, Sega Channel. Sega Channel was not good. I know people talk about how cool it was, had it a rotating thing of different lineups. It did not. When we say rotating lineup of games, that's like saying that, oh yeah, I went to the fruit stand and they have a rotating line of fruit. No, you're gonna have apples, bananas, limes, things like you might get pineapple once a year, or jackfruit once, or some random ass thing. But no, it was the same damn games. And even if it was different games, the Sega Channel required you to use your cable access. So if you had cable TV, if your dad wanted to watch cable TV or you wanted to watch cable TV, you couldn't use the Sega Channel because he had to have it plugged in. I mean, maybe you could have used a splitter. I don't think it would have worked. Also, if you lost connection for a split second, which back then you would lose connection. Hell, even now in terrestrial cable, you still lose connection. The thing would cut out and you would lose your progress in the game. And also the Sega Channel adapter could not save. So you couldn't play any RPGs. You couldn't play anything that required saving, because as soon as the system was off or cut out for a second, you lost everything. So the Sega Channel was terrible. No matter how cool it sounded, it was nowhere as cool as the Satellaview was for the people in Japan. And I had the Sega Channel for almost 2 years. I had from like 94 to 96, something of that nature. All right, another one. The Switch was doomed. This one got changed real quick. Now, I was on board with the Switch immediately, but if you look back and see, there were so many people down on Nintendo after the Wii U was a failure. The Wii was a swerve, which in my opinion, I did not like the Wii very much, all the motion controls, but the Switch was doomed, and yet here it is. It's become one of the best selling, if not the best selling Nintendo console of all time. The PS2. The PS2 was loved and adopted by everyone. No, it was loved and adopted by everyone because it was a DVD player. That's why. It was the cheapest DVD player you could get in the year 2000. DVD players back then, which for you guys out there who don't know, DVDs are when you get movies on a disc, you pop it in and then you can watch it and not have to stream it. And then afterwards, you still own it. So the PS2 was the cheapest DVD player you could get. And that's why I got mine, is to get it for a DVD player. I had maybe 4 or 5 PS2 games. And another reason why I think the PS2 became so popular, besides just the DVD player, is that the next generation had huge problems. So you had Microsoft's Xbox 360, which launched with a lot of problems and also was Microsoft. They really only had Halo at the time, and not many people were trusting jumping into that. You had Nintendo's offering, which was the Wii, which was swerving away. It was essentially a GameCube, but with motion controls. And then you had the PS3 that was insanely expensive. So what were you supposed to do? I myself went into WoW. I got heavily invested in that. I'm like, well, none of these really make sense. A lot of other people probably stuck with the PS2 for a while because the PS2 was sold for a long time. Even while the PS3 was around, there were still games, kind of like what happens nowadays. That's kind of the first console that did that. All right. And I think that about covers all of them. Let me check my notes here. Yeah. That's about it. All right, so there you go. Those are some big revisionist history moments in gaming. Let me know what you think about some revisionist history moments. Let me know what else, if you agree with some of my thought processes, if you disagree. I think I gave some good evidence here. Really, the ones that still bother me, like, I can't get over how much, like, play with the when the new N64, the analog one comes, the problem is that the N64 looks like trash unless you use it on a CRT. I've modded my N64 and it still looks like trash. So I'm looking forward to that new solution from analog, which hopefully I can get. But anyways, guys, just once again, thank you all so much. The growth, like I always say, is means so much to me. Comments are so nice. I love hearing from new subscribers. I love hearing from old subscribers. Thank you for liking. Thank you for sharing the video. Coming on, seeing all you guys. I'm actually 300 watch hours away from getting some monetization ability with stuff like super chats and memberships. I don't know, like, I'd have to use that in tandem with streaming, I feel. But let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in. Maybe we can figure out a way to get maybe just talk, maybe just talk about stuff or go over some things. I don't know. Let me know what you think. As a reminder, I release a new video every Tuesday. It's been so nice getting a hold of you. Take care.